Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's meetup. We are part of the .NET Foundation. You can learn more about .NET Foundation, .NETfoundation.org. So we are part of the .NET Pittsburgh user group here, and we are based out of Pittsburgh. These are our social handles. We do monthly meetups. It's all virtual, so please join us. Today's topic is choosing the best .NET UI framework for your project. And we have our presenter here with us. Hey, Aaron, welcome.
Hello. Thank you very much, Bala. Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Etienne. I will be your speaker today. And today we talk about choosing the best .NET UI framework for your project. So first thing first, just to make sure that I'm not wasting your time, that you are here for the right reason, here's what we talk about today. We talk about .NET UI framework from smartphone, tablet, and desktop specifically through a case study. We'll talk a little bit about some UI kit from web apps, but not extensively. We won't be talking extensively about web development in general. So to present myself, I'm Etienne Baudoux. I'm a software engineer at Microsoft. I'm working specifically on the Visual Studio IDE. In my spare time, I enjoy developing apps like DevToys, which is an app that we'll talk about today. And I could also tell you about the Titanic in a passionate manner for hours, for example. And also just realized that I actually have almost the same t-shirts on this picture. So yeah, that's really me here. All right, so let's jump directly in our topic. And the first thing is to look a little bit at the history of the various UI options that we had in .NET. And first, we look at the one developed by Microsoft. It all started in 2002 with WinForms, which stands for Windows Forms. And it allowed to make UI for apps for Windows and Windows Mobile. So I'm talking about before Windows Phone. This one particularly had the capability of following the same UI standards on the operating system. So if you remember, for example, Windows XP for the old desktop view, and Windows 7 and Windows 10 and then Windows 11, if you take a button on these operating systems, they look different from an operating system to another. And with WinForms, if you basically do not customize, like this button, for example, and that you run your app on Windows XP, 7, etc., you will have that button that follows the style of the operating system on which you run it. Later, in 2006, we got WPF, which stands for Windows Presentation Framework. And that's where we had XAML. So with WPF, we could make apps for Windows only. And XAML got introduced and allowed to do a better separation of the UI and the business logic, improving maintainability and scalability of your app. Then in 2011, there was a company and also a project called Xamarin that got involved. This company got acquired by Microsoft in 2016, and the idea behind Xamarin was to allowing people to make apps for iOS, Android, and macOS using Mono, which is an open source implementation of .NET framework. With Mono and with Xamarin, you could therefore make an app. And the interesting thing is that here the UI, you had to code the UI yourself in C# for each independent platform. So one code for iOS, one code for Android, and one code for macOS. So that was not necessarily super easy for developers because they had to maintain 3 versions of the UI. And that's why later in 2014 got introduced Xamarin.Forms. And that allowed to make app using XAML that time. So that time we could make one XAML script, basically one XAML for the UI, and reuse that for iOS, Android, Windows Phone, macOS, and later UWP. So talking about UWP, that stands for Universal Windows Platform. And this one was developed by Microsoft, and it's a little bit of a UFO in this list. UFO because, first, UWP allowed to make apps for basically all the Microsoft ecosystem. So Windows, Windows for IoT, Windows Phone, HoloLens, and Xbox. And the reason why I call that a UFO, it's because you could make an app using C# and XAML, but there was actually not .NET running behind. It's another thing called WinRT, which stands for Windows Runtime. And WinRT is basically a set of easy API that you can use to get access to the camera, for example, the microphone, the notification in Windows, and all this was a little bit harder to access before there were this API. Another particularity of WinRT or UWP in general is that by default, your app was sandboxed. So because of a sandbox, you cannot have access to all the feature of the operating system. For example, you cannot access to, let's say, program file or on Windows or the system32 folder. You could not have access to that. Another thing is that with UWP, we got introduced Fluent UI. Perhaps you already heard about this. That's basically the Microsoft UI guidance for the Microsoft ecosystem. And yeah, just to finish on UWP, you could actually run some .NET, but it has to be most of the time it has to be as a separated process. You will have two processes side by side. One that is your UWP app with the UI, and one .NET app that runs in parallel of that without a UI, and you will have to handle yourself the communication in between, which added a little bit of challenge. So following this, in 2020, got introduced .NET MAUI, and that's a direct evolution of Xamarin.Forms. This allowed to make apps for iOS, Android, Windows, and macOS using .NET 6 or later instead of Mono. And then in 2021, we got WinUI 3, which I personally tend to see as a sort of evolution or reboot of UWP, but with a twist. Basically, with WinUI 3, right now we can make apps for Windows 10 and later using actually .NET instead of UWP, but you can still use the WinRT API inside of your WinUI 3 app. So you still have this fancy API for accessing the camera, the microphone, notification, and makes very modern app for Windows. And Fluent UI is out of the box instead of being possible through a third-party library. And then we got also the same year Blazor Hybrid. So if you know ASP.NET or Blazor, this may ring a bell for you, but no worries, we'll dive into that later. Blazor Hybrid, basically the idea is to have an app that is made in C#, for example, but the UI is web-based. And this is supported by WinForms, WPF, WinUI 3, which are all things we mentioned just before, and .NET MAUI, which means that it also works on iOS, Android, and macOS on top of Windows. Now, all these were the options developed by Microsoft. There are some also options made by the community, because we have a large community in .NET. And there are way too many for me. I cannot mention all of them, but there are two in particular I want to mention here: Avalonia UI and Uno Platform. And we'll dive into all of this a little bit later. But before that, we need to talk about something else. Make the difference between a native and a non-native app. You may already know that there are multiple kinds of apps out there. You can have native app, cross-platform, hybrid, and PWA, which stands for progressive web app. But the thing is that by preparing this presentation for you, I realized that a lot of people were confused about what makes an app native. And let's try to demystify this here then. And in order to answer to this question, what is a native app? I would like to try to answer this question by separating the business logic and the UI. Let's start with the business logic. And for this, I need to answer to another question, which is .NET native? And short answer is that it kind of depends on what you do with your projects. Because you see, by default, .NET is managed code. So it's not native like C or C++ or assembly code. But if you turn on the AOT option in your projects, then your .NET code is compiled into machine code that will target a specific platform, and therefore it becomes native. Now, some purists may disagree with me because you may argue that there are still some layer of abstraction, for example, that makes that the code may not be as fast as assembly or C, and it may be right, but in overall, it's still compiled to machine code, still targeting a specific platform, so it is native code. So that was relatively easy for the business logic. Now let's look at the UI, and this one is a little bit more subtle. What makes a UI being native? And in my opinion, there are two things for this. The first one is that the UI should rely on native UI components of the operating system on which it runs. And it should respect the UI guideline of the operating system on which it runs. So Fluent UI on Windows, for example, and for the Microsoft ecosystem in general, human interface guidelines for Apple, and material design for the Google ecosystem. Now let's take an example quickly. Here on the left, you may recognize the Windows Calculator app, which is a UWP app, by the way. It uses native UI elements and it respects the Fluent UI guidelines of Windows 11. What makes me say that is that I'm not necessarily a pro on that Fluent UI. I don't know absolutely everything about it for sure, but I know some basics. And I can tell you that all these colors here respect what is mentioned into the guideline for the dark theme, along with the fact that the buttons have a corner radius of 4 pixels. And the color of this button here follow the accent color that is defined by the user in the settings of Windows. And all these participate to making the app respecting the Fluent UI guideline. Now, on the right, you may recognize Spotify. And there is a reason why I'm showing Spotify here. And by the way, I could have used another app, but Spotify is a good example, I find. So the thing is that this screenshot here is from Spotify on macOS, the desktop app. And the thing is that if you have Spotify on Windows, the desktop app, or in your web browser, it's exactly the same UI. And there is a reason for that. The UI is web-based. Now, if you take the desktop app instead of the web browser, if you take the desktop app, so like the Windows or the Mac app, there will be some native code that runs behind it to maybe communicate with your speaker and play some music, etc. But the UI is basically web-based. And this is called a hybrid app. Now, by doing this, Spotify is able to maintain one UI that is shared across multiple platforms, and therefore probably one code that is just shared across multiple platforms. And by doing this, Spotify does not really respect the UI guidance for each of these operating systems, but they give themselves the freedom of having a stronger identity. Here's an example. If you look at the logo of Spotify, you may recognize this bright green that they have. And guess what? We find this green at multiple places in the UI, for example, in the bar here, in the playlist, on some button and some other button here. And basically all these contribute to give Spotify their strong identity. And we automatically recognize Spotify by seeing this green and this UI. Let me give you another example, and this time I will talk about .NET MAUI. So if you still don't know what is .NET MAUI, that's okay, we'll talk about this a little bit later. But here's what I want to emphasize here. So when you create a .NET MAUI app in Visual Studio, and that you run it for the first time, you get what you have on the left. This is a screenshot on Android, and that's a screenshot on Windows. The interesting thing here is that .NET MAUI, under the hood, it relies on native UI components. But the thing is that you can customize these components. And by default, the project you create in Visual Studio come with some customization question. And the thing is that if I'm being picky here, I could tell that, okay, this customization give the app maybe a more unique UI and give the app a strong identity because it looks the same or very similar from a platform to another. But it puts the app away from the operating system UI guidance. For example, again, if I'm being picky on Fluent UI, on this button, for example, here, the corner radius is 8 pixels, while the Fluent UI guidance says will be 4 pixels. Another thing is the color. For example, here does not necessarily follow the color recommended by the guidance, neither the one of the accent color that is defined to the settings of Windows. So that UI, therefore, in the end, it relies on native UI components, but it does not necessarily look native. So you see the difference? Native UI element, but they don't necessarily look native. Now, the cool thing is that with .NET MAUI, as I was saying, it comes with some customization right at the beginning when you create your project. But you can disable all this, and when you remove all this customization, you get what you have on the right. It's exactly the same app, but just here we just use the raw native UI element without any customization or very minimal customization. And then magically, in a sort of automatic manner, my UI respects the UI guidance of Android and of Windows. So in the end, which is the best? Making an app that has a native looking UI, or making an app that looks the same on each platform? And well, it kind of depends actually on your user preference, which varies based on the habit of your customer, the kind of customer, and the various devices they use. Let me take an example. Let's imagine that I'm a customer who has an iPhone and an Android tablet and a Windows PC. I'm using the three main ecosystems here. And it may just make my life easier and better if I had an app that looks the same across all these ecosystems, because therefore I will not lose myself into the app every time I start from my phone to my PC, for example. Now let's imagine I'm a different person. And let's imagine I have an iPhone and an iPad and a MacBook. Now I'm only using the Apple ecosystem, and therefore I'm used to the design language of Apple. In this case, it may make my life easier to just have an app that is that respects the UI guidance of Apple and that looks the same on everywhere on the Apple ecosystem. That may make my life easier. Now, the truth is, when at Microsoft, we ask our customer what do they prefer for a smartphone app, there is a 50-50 ratio of people who prefer an app that looks native versus an app that looks the same on every platform. So in the end, there is no definitive answer here. And I guess my best advice would be to ask your customer, what do they prefer? And again, it may vary on what kind of customer you are dealing with. So with all this being said, I think we are now able to define a clear definition of what is a native app exactly. And we may agree to disagree, because I know that we all have a kind of own definition of what is a native app. But here's mine. In my opinion, it is an app that is compiled to platform-specific machine code, utilizing native UI components with limited customization. It ensures optimal performance, seamless platform integration, and a consistent platform standard appearance. And now that we define this, we are now able to define the other kind of apps. So native, we just talked about this, basically an app that is compiled to machine code, use native UI components, and no to just minimal customization. Cross-platform app is an app where usually you try to reuse the same UI on every operating system. It may or may not rely on native UI component under the hood, and it may or may not compile the app into machine code. And this really depends on what technology and what framework you are using here. Let's just even forget .NET for a second. That really depends on what technology you are using. And even in .NET, you may use .NET, but you may or may not compile it into machine code, so it kind of varies there. The next one is hybrid. That was the example with Spotify. The idea here is to have your business logic that is coded into native code and your UI that is web-based. And then PWA, the idea is just to have a traditional website, but that is installed onto the customer machine like if it was a native app. So you will have the app into your start menu in Windows or the home screen on your smartphone, and you can just press on it, and we magically just open this website, present it like if it was a native app, because it will be into its own window, but it's just a website. Okay, so now that we talk about this, let me tell you about our case study today. And we'll talk about DevToys, which is an app I made with a good friend of mine, to whom I'm saying hi, by the way, if he's watching this. And yeah, specifically, we look the story for going from DevToys 1.0 to 2.0. So if you don't know what DevToys is, that's fine. You're not hurting my ego here, no problem. So DevToys is a Swiss Army knife for developers. So do you know all these I would call it sketchy websites where you may open them just to format a JSON or encode or decode some base64 text, where it appeared that me and my friend, Benjamin, we wanted to make a desktop app that basically bundle all these tools into a single app and making nice looking for the customers, and so they don't have to open a website for that. Now, I really want to emphasize this app is not developed by Microsoft. Even if I am a Microsoft employee, I did this with my friend in my spare time. This is not sponsored by Microsoft. This is not owned by Microsoft. This is purely a side project made for fun. It is free and open source. You can download it on devtoys.app. And very important for the next parts, it is a UWP app. All right, allow me to flex here a little bit with just some numbers. We have 42,000 monthly users, and the only thing I want to mention here is that basically we launched the app in 2022, 1.0, and then the version 2.0 is currently available as a preview in 2024. Now, to go from DevToys 1.0 to 2.0, we had to analyze what do our customers like and what do they don't like about it, and so what do we need to change. The first thing we noticed that our customer really like the native looking UI of our app, and the fact that it's accessible. The fact that the UI is accessible is because we are using native UI. When you use native UI, you get some accessibility feature for free, a little bit more than when you are doing a web UI. Because it's native UI and run on Windows, it also respects the Fluent UI guidance with very, very minimal customization that we did. So that was very nice, so we could make the app very quickly and looking fancy this way. The app is also well integrated with the operating system. We have some custom feature that use the clipboard, allows you to pin some stuff to the start menu, these kind of things. The app has a very fast startup. That's because the app is made in UWP and that it combined to machine code, and that basically boosts the startup of the app. So that is very nice. And people really like the fact that it uses Monaco editor, which is also a burden because it makes the app consuming a lot of memory. Now, if you don't know what is the Monaco editor, it is a free and open source web-based code editor module developed by Microsoft. And in fact, it's the same editor that you have in Visual Studio Code. So if you ever use Visual Studio Code, you use Monaco editor without knowing. And this is great for us. We like it. People like the fact that it has this command palette that you can have, like in Visual Studio Code, of course, with a bit less feature, but basically we have that. And it's a very nice editor. We really like it. But the thing is that because it's web-based and that our UI is native, we have to allocate, instantiate one web view every time that we want to display this editor. And that is actually what consumes a lot of RAM. It's not the editor itself, it's the web view that we have to allocate. So here in this example, I have two editors side by side separated by a native component. We have to allocate two web views, and that is very expensive. Another thing is that quickly when we released the app in 2022, we got a ticket on GitHub asking us to make the app on macOS and Linux. And at first, we were not necessarily thrilled about it, but it quickly became the most voted issue on GitHub. So we found that, okay, let's give it a try. And because of this, a year later, basically, on January 1st, 2023, we started working on DevToys 2.0. And I like how in general, during a new year, people have new resolution, like doing more sport, which I should do, by the way. But no, me and my friend Benjamin, we are dedicated at coding. That's what we do on January 1st. So anyway, DevToys 2.0 came with the following requirements. It should be cross-platform on desktop, Windows, Mac, Linux. It should maintain the same native-looking UI on Windows because we know customers like this. And if possible, let's try to keep the Monaco editor. And that will be a challenge. I will come to that. Okay, so first consideration, should we make the app native or not? And there's some good reasons for that. For example, the fact that the app has a good startup, thanks to the fact that it's compiled to machine code, is very nice because people hate waiting. but yeah, so we could do that. We could make just an app, made in C# and compile it with AOT, and we have a fast starter that's great. We can use the .NET workload to use native UI on every platform without using XAML. But by doing this, we will have to code the UI for each platform. And me and my friend, we are used to Windows. We will need to learn the UI paradigm and the UI API for each platform, Windows, Mac, and Linux. And immediately, the learning curve becomes very high for just a side project that me and my friend wants to do. And therefore, our development costs become high. So when I talk about cost, it's mainly time, because in our case, it's a side project. We don't spend money at making these projects. But imagine as a company, they will have therefore a financial cost, because your employees will have to spend more time at learning about all this and making the UI. So let's put native on the side, and therefore let's try cross-platform. And for this, we have multiple frameworks that I will introduce you. The first one is Uno Platform. That's the first one we tried. Uno Platform, if you don't know what it is a framework, free and open source, that allows to make one app that runs on every platform. Windows 7, 8, I almost said Windows 9, sorry. Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 10, Windows 11, Linux, macOS, iOS, Android, and even WebAssembly, so even in a web browser. The cool thing about Uno Platform is that on Windows, it relies on WinUI 3, which gives us Fluent UI for free out of the box, which is really great for us, because we want to keep Fluent UI for DevToys. And on other platforms, on most of them, it also uses native UI component, which is also great from an accessibility point of view. I'm saying most of them because, of course, in WebAssembly, this will be into a web browser. So of course, it is not a native UI. But like on iOS or Android, it relies on native UI components. So in the case of DevToys, why trying Uno Platform? Well, one of the good things is that it used the same XAML than in UWP. And if you didn't know, there is a little bit of differences between the XAML between UWP and WPF or .NET MAUI. There's a little bit of differences every time into the XAML, while here Uno reuses the same of UWP. And since DevToys 1.0 is UWP, it's easy for us, just copy paste and it should just work, magic. So that's the first thing that is great. Second thing, again, render the UI in Windows using WinUI 3, which gives us Fluent UI for free, great. And on macOS, it relies on Mac Catalyst. So Mac Catalyst is basically the equivalent of UWP, but in the Apple ecosystem. It allows you to make one app that runs on macOS, iPadOS, and iPhone. Another thing that in our case, we are not particularly interested by that. We only target macOS. But at the time, in early 2023, macOS was not well supported by Uno Platform. And that's what people from Uno Platform told us. And by the way, thank you guys if you are watching this. Really appreciate your help here. So it got improved since then. macOS support is better now on Uno Platform. But at the time, it was not great. So we had to use Mac Catalyst in our case. And actually, you know what? That was a problem for us. Two main issues we encountered, and it's actually not the fault of Uno Platform, but more some problem with the dependencies on Uno Platform. Dependencies that Uno Platform have. So the first one is that on WinUI 3, the web view does not support transparency. Why does this matter, you may ask? Well, it's because if it does not support transparency, then we cannot apply the Mica effect. If you don't know what Mica effect is, this new effect we have in Windows 11 that basically the idea is to bleed your desktop wallpaper into the background of the foreground windows that is on your operating system. So let's take the example. You see here how my wallpaper is bluish in the center and more darker on the side. Well, on that window here, I don't know if you see this well on your screen, but there is some bluish color in the center, and then it gets darker on the side. But the rest of the UI, you see, like for example, here there is a rectangle. That rectangle looks gray. I think that this rectangle is actually semi-transparent, otherwise that Mica effect is not visible through that rectangle. So therefore, to get this to work with the Monaco editor, we need to give transparency to the web view. And I know this is a very tiny detail of aesthetic, but we are very attached to keeping a very good fluent UI on Windows. And so we are a little bit sad of abandoning Monaco editor. But again, this is just a tiny detail of UI. This is not a blocking issue. However, on macOS, we got a blocking issue. And that involves MacCatalyst app specifically running on macOS, specifically with if your app is compiled to ARM64. So if your app targets the M1, M2, M3, M4 processor, then you have this issue. And the issue in question is that basically the keyboard input does not work in the web view on MacCatalyst. And that's a big problem when you want to put a code editor such as Monaco, because you expect people to be able to type into the editor. The interesting thing is that this bug does not impact just the .NET app, it also impacts apps made in Swift. And that bug has been found in 2022. And as I'm talking today, late 2024, the bug still exists. It still has not been fixed by Apple. So let's look into some workaround perhaps. And for that, we look into Avalon Edit, which is a free and open source editor made in WPF and Avalonia. I have to admit, personal opinion here, it is not as good as Monaco editor. So we're a little bit disappointed. And there is no implementation for Uno platform. So we will have to make our own UI implementation of Uno platform, and that may take quite a lot of time. So we are not super thrilled about this. Now, the other option we had was the Visual Studio IDE editor. Did you know that, like Monaco editor, the Visual Studio editor is open source? Actually, the API definition is open source, but not the UI implementation. So similarly, we will have had to code the UI ourselves for this. And at the beginning, when I presented myself, I said that I was a Microsoft employee and that I work specifically on the Visual Studio IDE. I actually have access to the code of this editor and how the UI implemented. But I cannot use it for my own project. Otherwise, I will break many rules and I will get fired. And I don't want to get fired. So let's forget this idea. Okay, so therefore, Uno platform does not work for us. So let's try another one, .NET MAUI. So .NET MAUI, it's a free and open source framework developed by Microsoft, and it's a direct evolution of Xamarin.Forms. It allows to make apps for Windows 10, 11, iOS, Android, macOS using MacCatalyst. Like Uno platform, and this is very similar to Uno platform, on Windows, Mac, iOS, and Android, each relies on native UI components, which again is great for question of accessibility and performance. However, and perhaps you already find this out, I do not mention Linux. And yeah, Linux is not supported at all by .NET MAUI, which in our case of desktops is a big problem because we want to make an app that works on every desktop. We don't care of a smartphone and tablet in this case. And then, because it has similar dependencies than Uno platform regarding WinUI 3 and MacCatalyst, then we have the same issue with the web view and the question of transparency, and the fact that the web view on MacCatalyst does not support keyboard input. So we end up with a similar problem, basically. So the third option that we explored was Avalonia UI. And this one is actually quite different than Uno platform. The main difference I see personally is that Avalon UI does not rely on native UI elements under the hood. They make their own components, so even like button, they made everything from scratch. And that gives us potentially some advantage. Maybe we'll have less issue with this. Originally, and this is, I will digress a little bit here. Originally, Avalonia UI was specialized into desktop development. And so therefore it is mature and quite stable for desktop development, which is, it put us into confidence for our project therefore. And it's only more recently that they introduced the support iOS, Android, and WebAssembly. But don't get me wrong, they're already very great on this. It's not like a beta or something. No, it's already very great on this. However, and you see this coming, maybe in our case, it did not work again. Here, the following reason. On Windows, the UI does not respect the Fluent UI guidance at all by default. So there is a third-party library we could have used, Fluent Avalonia, but at that time in 2023, it was not perfect yet. It was not respecting super well the Fluent UI guidance for Windows. So we are not super thrilled about this. Then also applying the Mika effect was kind of hacky, and we are not super happy about that again. And then the main problem we had on every platform is that there was no good support for WebView. This got addressed since summer 2023. There is a very good third-party library for supporting WebView, but at that time we were in spring 2023 and it was just not there yet. So with all this being said, we unfortunately lost 4 months of our time into exploring all this. Now remember, this is a side project, so we do this in our spare time. We did not do that at full time. I'm sure we'll have spent less time if it was at full time, And yeah, it's kind of unfortunate, but I understand truly all these framework I just mentioned are great for smartphone and tablet, which makes sense because that's where the market is nowadays. Not much desktop anymore. But gosh, that was painful having to go through all this and having, unfortunately, so many issues. So since native does not work for us, cross-platform does not work for us, what about hybrid? Let's try hybrid. And for this, let me introduce you to Blazor Hybrid. So if you don't know what Blazor is, it is a framework developed by Microsoft that allows developers to make web apps using C# and .NET. And that C# and .NET we run either on the client side or the server side. We'll talk about this in a second. Blazor is based on the foundation of ASP.NET. So if you are already familiar with ASP.NET, you will be able to learn Blazor very easily. Now, I'm seeing 3 options for making Blazor apps. The one that will interest us the most here is Blazor Hybrid. But let me try to compare a little bit all these options just so we clarify a little bit what is Blazor Hybrid. So the first one is Blazor Server. And the idea is just to make a traditional website. You have your website on the, you have the UI on the website on the client's machine. It is made with HTML, CSS, JavaScript. And then your C# code is hosted on a server in the cloud. And then the communication between both is handled through WebSocket. Then we have Blazor WebAssembly. Here we'll download most of the website onto the client's machine. And the idea is to be able to run some C# code into the web browser using WebAssembly. So the C# code will be compiled to WebAssembly and run into the web browser. Now, you may already know that the web browser has a sandbox. You cannot do absolutely everything into that sandbox. For example, you cannot access program file again, or you cannot access System32. And because of that, the .NET API you can use into WebAssembly are limited. It's limited. You cannot use absolutely everything. Another thing about Blazor WebAssembly that is quite important to know is that because it downloads your C# code and compile it on the user machine, compilation takes some time, and therefore your website may be a little bit slower to load. And then the third option, that's the one that interests us here, is Blazor Hybrid. So if you're familiar with Electron, basically Blazor Hybrid is a direct competitor of Electron. And the idea is to make a hybrid app. So the idea of a hybrid app is to have your business logic that will run into native code, aka C# here, and having the UI that is being into a web view. So the UI is web-based, and then all the business logic is in C#. And all this run into a native app, either on your desktop or on your smartphone. No need to reach out to a server to do all the business logic. Of course, you can, if you have a service online, that's fine. But the whole app itself, you can just run offline on the desktop or smartphone using that native app. Really cool. And so then to make the communication between the web view and the native code in .NET, we use a magic component that is called the Blazor Web View. And this magic component in question is officially developed and supported by Microsoft for WinUI 3, WPF, WinForms, and .NET MAUI. And because it's .NET MAUI, therefore it works on iOS, Android, macOS, on top of Windows. So this is really nice. I really like it personally. Now, in the case of DevToys, why would Blazor Hybrid be interesting? Well, first, the other option does not work, so do we have any choice, right? But yeah, the actual argument here is that we use a single web view for the whole UI. And that is much better in terms of memory consumption in our case, because remember, we had to, in DevToys 1.0, we had to allocate multiple web views, one per instance of Monaco Editor. And by having just one instance, that makes the memory consumption being much, much lower over time. So that is really great. Second thing that personally I really like with Blazor is that, when you make an Electron app, such as a Hello World, easily the app will take 100 to 200 megabytes of disk space. And the reason is that when you make an Electron app, your app will come with a copy of the Chromium web view. And the thing that Blazor does not, or Blazor Hybrid, should I say, does not do it this way. Blazor Hybrid, instead, it relies on the web view that is actually installed on the customer machine. So on Windows, it would be the WebView 2, which is based out of Chromium. On Android, it will also be Chromium. On iOS and Mac, it will be WebKit. And guess what? On Linux, well, it's not officially supported on Linux, but we'll come to that. And so one advantage of doing this is that therefore your app is smaller because it doesn't have to come with a copy of the web view in question. However, a disadvantage of this is that since the web engine may change from a platform to another, then your CSS may break. If you're already a web developer, you are probably very familiar with this. CSS tend to be sometimes act a little bit differently from an operating system to another. And so, yeah, that's a problem that you may have to deal with. So if you did not figure out already, basically our solution is therefore to use Blazor Hybrid for DevToys. And based on the learning we got with the previous platform, with the previous framework that we talked about, here is what we came up with. So on Windows, since WinUI 3 does not work for us because we really want the Mica effect, but the web view does not support transparency, then we use WPF with the WPF Blazor web view, which support transparency very well. So nice for us. And then we just use a few Win32 API to enable the Mica effects in WPF. It's a little bit more complicated than WinUI 3, on which you can do that in just one line of code. But yeah, there are a lot of examples online on internet. You can just look at that on GitHub and they will just work out. On macOS, since making a UI kit app using MacCatalyst is out of question because of this bug we have with the keyboard, then the workaround is to use the .NET workload for macOS, which gives us an AppKit app. And because .NET MAUI does not support officially AppKits, well, we simply did a fork of the Blazor web view from .NET MAUI. Again, it's free and open source under MIT license, so very easy license. So you can go ahead and use that. And yeah, we did a fork of it. It took us just a few hours to do that. It was very, very quick because AppKit and UIKit are very similar actually in many aspects. And then on Linux, that become completely custom. On Linux, we had to use a third-party library for making the UI using GTK. On Linux, at least a lot of distribution by default come with Mozilla Firefox, which is WebKit. And therefore, hey, how about also forking the Blazor web view of .NET MAUI and apply it for Linux, also using WebKit, because again, on iOS and macOS, Blazor Hybrid relies on WebKit. So therefore, the implementation in Linux is very similar, and that was again quite easy to do. It took us about 1 or 2 days to fork it and make it work. Now, with all this being said, okay, the UI will be web-based. So what about the Fluent UI in this story? Because it would be web-based, so no Fluent UI anymore, right? And you're absolutely right, because by default, when you create, for example, a Blazor MAUI app, by default, you get this UI, which has nothing to do with Fluent UI. But there are a few UI kits out there, and here are a few ones that I want to recommend. I cannot mention them all, there are way too many, but here are a few. Sorry about that. Okay, so the first one is Blazor, free and open source, and in my opinion, it looks great on smartphone. But this is really a personal take, really personal opinion. You can judge by yourself, of course. Then there is Raisin, which is partially free. There is some premium things that you can pay. For example, if you want, that's a good way to support them. There is also Fluent UI Blazor, which is built and maintained by Microsoft employees like me and external people that are not Microsoft employees. And the thing that Fluent UI implements a very great, it does a very great implementation of the web guidance for Fluent UI. But if you didn't already know, there are actually multiple guidance for Fluent UI. There is one for Windows specifically, and there is one for web, for example. So this one reproduces very well the guidance for web, not necessarily for Windows desktop, and therefore I was not super happy about this. And then me and my friend, we discovered Fluent Svelte. Okay, so this is not Blazor. This is Fluent Svelte. It's Svelte. It's completely different, right? The thing is that in this library, it respects perfectly the Fluent UI guidance for Windows 11. And that very interests us. So in the end, what he ended up doing is something I would not recommend to anyone to do. We reinvented the wheel by basically making our own UI kit. So what we do is that we cherry pick the CSS from Fluent Svelte. We cherry pick some things from Blazor, Raisin, Fluent UI Blazor, also made up our own stuff sometimes, and we end up with a UI that looks like this after just a few days. This is a very early screenshot of DevToys 2.0 during its development. You can see here we are testing a bunch of buttons here because these are basically the same button just with different style. We are testing multiple things here. Same thing here, we are testing with the info bar, all the possibilities that we had in the UI that we had to support. This is a screenshot on macOS much later on into the development process. Same thing again, all this UI is web-based. We just deal a little bit with the .NET workload of macOS and you learn a little bit of the macOS UI API in order to enable this transparent effect in the background. And we had to customize a little bit the CSS to make it, give it a little bit more macOS-ish look. But I admit it doesn't respect perfectly the guidance of macOS. But again, we really wanted it to respect it well on Windows. The rest was a bit nice to have, but not a requirement. Similarly, on Linux, we made the UI based on Ubuntu because why not? It's a very common distribution. And because it's web-based, there's just no way we spend some time at reproducing the UI of all the distribution out there. Ubuntu, Debian, Linux, Mint, no way. That's just too much work. No, because our app therefore does not rely on Avalonia, neither .NET MAUI, neither Uno platform, we had to make some platform-specific code. So we had to do some for supporting the clipboard, the window management, also had to make some code to support the jump list into the taskbar of Windows and the menu bar on macOS. And that's it. DevToys is now, it's available online, DevToys 2.0, and you can try it out. And with all the learning that I got, I am now able to tell you how to find the best .NET UI framework for your projects, if possible, without losing 4 months. And I really want to emphasize here, you have to keep in mind the following. Choosing the right .NET UI framework is a unique journey for every project. We just saw that with DevToys. And so there is no one-size-fits-all guidance. There is no universal guidance. But with my experience and learning, I'm able to give you a few advices. First, look at your budget, for example. If your budget is high, then consider maybe you doing a native UI app. But again, ask your customer what they prefer, because we saw earlier there is a kind of 50-50 ratio. Kind of interesting, right? If your budget is inexistent, really have zero budget, but that your app already exists as a web view, as a web app, how about making a PWA app? That is very easy to do. Other thing, whether performance, in particular startup performance, is important. If yes, really consider enabling the AOT option to have your code being combined to machine code. That will really boost the startup performance. And if possible, use native UI instead of web UI, for example. That will also help with performances. Accessibility, again, with native UI, you get some accessibility feature for free, which is nice. So take consideration of that. Also take consideration if you are a project manager or like a team manager or project lead, consider what's the area of skills of your team. If your team is mainly made of web dev, why not trying Blazor Hybrid? They are likely already familiar with CSS and HTML, so it should make it relatively easy for them to learn about Blazor Hybrid. So many things like this to take consideration of. Now here's a lovely table that I made to compare a little bit all the options that we mentioned today. There is no point for me to go from the top left to bottom right and look into all the details of this table. I invite you to take a screenshot of this if you want, or look at the replay on YouTube, or maybe at the end of this speech, I will share a QR code that allows you to access to this whole PowerPoint, so you can have this table again. Okay, now let me just jump to the next one. And this is another lovely thing, a decision tree, that basically takes many of the advice I already gave and help you to define, okay, what direction to do. There will be some separated decision tree for all of these bugs here, but let me try to dive into that. So first, let's look at whether your team is made of mainly web dev. So if your team is mainly made of web dev, or if you have a strong need of a visual web component, such as Monaco Editor, for example, then consider making a hybrid app directly. And then otherwise, it kind of depends on what platform you target. If you target Xbox, you kind of have no choice but doing a native app, which will be UWP. If you target smartphone or multiple desktop, so like not just Windows, but also Windows, Mac, and Linux, for example, consider cross-platform solutions, if possible. And if that's not the case, kind of depend, hey, can you afford native UI or not? But like when I say this, using not even XAML, using just the .NET workload. If that's the case, go for native app, otherwise cross-platform. Okay, now let's dive into a hybrid app. So for a hybrid app, it kind of depends again on what you're targeting. If you target smartphone and tablet, go for .NET MAUI Blazor Hybrid. That's the best solution for you, in my opinion. Otherwise, if you target DevToys, you end up in the same story than we had with DevToys. On Mac, you will have to do a custom Blazor Hybrid app using AppKit instead of .NET MAUI, and do a fork of the .NET MAUI Blazor WebView. Disclaimer here, little parenthesis. The fork we did for DevToys, we did not turn it into a reusable Nugget package yet, but DevToys is open source. Feel free to go on internet and find our code and do the fork yourself. Really, it did not take us a lot of time to do it, so I'm sure it should be achievable for you too. On Linux, same thing, but using GTK. I don't have a particular third-party GTK library to recommend here, unfortunately. I tried a few and they're all fine. And then on Windows, it kind of depends. Is Fluent UI important for you? If yes, use WPF and enable Mika and put transparency on your WebView. Otherwise, .NET MAUI Blazor Hybrid is fine. Now let's jump into this box, the cross-platform app. And for this, again, what platform do you target? If it's smartphone and tablets, it kind of depends whether you are already familiar with UWP XAML or not. If yes, then go ahead and try Uno platform. If not, try .NET MAUI. That's also a great options. And if you target desktop, in particular multiple desktop, not just one desktop, I will recommend Avalonia. And if you target both, Then I don't have a strong preference personally between Uno platform and Avalonia. Both are really great. Maybe one difference I would mention is that Uno platform relies on native UI components on every desktop and smartphone, while on Avalonia it does not. So that may be something to take consideration of, but my guess is that you will have to do some more deep research. Again, there is no there is no ultimate one-size-fits-all guidance on what to choose. And then finally, for native app, again, what platform are you targeting? If it's Xbox, you have to go with UWP. If it's macOS, I would recommend to use the .NET workload for macOS, which gives you access to all the API for AppKit, and that will be just a traditional macOS app. If it's Linux, third-party library for GTK. And if it's Windows, it gets a little bit more complicated, unfortunately. My first question would be, is Fluent UI important for you? If no, consider WPF or WinForm, it's just fine. If it is important, then ask yourself, is it okay for you to be sandboxed? And particularly, you want also to have your app also running on Xbox? If yes, use UWP. Otherwise, use WinUI 3. That's the most up-to-date library right now, and it is still actively developed today. So yeah, and with all this being said, you just learned today how to choose the best .NET UI for your project. I really hope you enjoy and learn some stuff today. My name is Etienne. I'm happy to take some time to answer a few questions if it remains some time now. I see 4 minutes, that will be short. But yeah, feel free to scan these 2 QR codes here. There is one that will point you to these PowerPoints, and another one that will point you to that decision tree that I just showed you, but on the Canvas website, and on which you can zoom, unzoom, and go into the detail of that. So yeah, now we'll give the speaker back to Bala. And Bala, thank you again
Hey, thanks again, man. Really appreciate your time. I have a few questions here. Let me show it on the screen if you can read it.
Sure, absolutely.
The first one is from Michael Powell.
So Maui, there are still platform challenges addressing I2C, for instance, that are platform specific. Yes, there may still be some challenges there. For I2C, are we talking about, working with like Raspberry Pi or this kind of things? Is that what I'm understanding from it?
I think there is a second part of it. I'll just add that too.
Yeah, so well, I would say I'm not very knowledgeable on this topic, but if I would say try .NET MAUI, and if that doesn't work, try maybe Uno platform or Avalonia. Maybe that works better there. Or WinForms or the WPF, that matter as well. Yep, I guess similar thing. That would be my similar answer. Try, I guess. I'm not familiar with I2C, to be honest.
Okay, the second one here, do these native apps get installed when they are web applications?
If you are referring to PWA, generally at the top of your web browser, you will have an option that allows you to install the app. Sometimes it appears as a notification on the web browser. And if you are referring to Blazor Hybrid, then, well, if you're targeting, for example, Android or iOS, in the end, you will end up with just a traditional Android, iOS, Windows app. For Android and iOS, you can just publish it on the Apple Store and Google Play as traditional native app. And on Windows, you have multiple options. You can publish it using a MSIX on the Microsoft Store. You can also make an installer. You can also just make a zip and share that to your customer. There are many ways to do that on Windows.
Okay, at least I want you to smile for this one.
Thank you very much. I appreciate. And I'm sure my friend Benjamin, who is maybe not here, but if he read this, I'm sure he appreciates too. It surprised me that 50% seems to want native-looking apps that look different from platform to platform. Yes, I agree. It is surprising too, but that's what we have again at Microsoft when we interview customers about smartphone app in particular. You may have a different result, based again on what kind of customer you ask your question to. I would have thought that the popular choice would be to have a consistent look-through platform to make the look part of it branding. I agree. And again, kind of depend on what products you are making. Think of Spotify again. They decide to take the direction of making a consistent UI through multiple platforms, so their branding is stronger. And that's what I was emphasizing earlier. They have a stronger identity than an app like DevToys, for example. DevToys does not have a very strong visual identity because we really pay attention to respect the Fluent UI, and that's just a kind of personal choice on that. We could have tried to give a better branding on it, but we decided not to. Kind of personal choice here. And again, best thing I think is just to ask your customer, what do they like? Good summary of a bunch of confusing options. Thank you very much. Can we develop mobile app using Blazor? Yes, with Blazor Hybrid. That's the one I was mentioning earlier. Blazor Hybrid is officially supported by .NET MAUI, which allows you to make mobile apps, so iOS and Android. But I will also add it allows you to make apps, not just for mobile app, but also iPad, tablets, desktop, such as macOS and Windows. Any new and upcoming UI framework to look out for? If there is, I guess the best would be to look at the .NET Conf that happened next week. There will be some information probably about some .NET UI information in framework. I do not have particular information there, but that would be my guess. Look into that, maybe you will have something. DevToys is a great example of a good native app, in my opinion, by the way. So is PowerToys, although that is not cross-platform, sadly. Yeah, well, PowerToys is, I guess, made specifically for Windows Power users. And, all these great tools that PowerToys provide, I guess it would be challenging to make it work on every platform, because on macOS, for example, you maybe have, and just hypothesis here, you may have some features maybe are hard to also do on PowerToys and do them on macOS. And because the paradigm of the operating system, the philosophy of the operating system is slightly different, maybe some feature of PowerToys will just never work on macOS. In DevToys, it works great because, again, these are just tiny tools on which you can just paste a JSON. I guess it makes sense it can work on every platform. There is no major issue here. And we also got a few feedback of asking us, people asking us, for example, hey, could you put like a tool for making a screenshot directly from DevToys? I would love that, but I would have to do it on every platform, and immediately it makes it much more complicated. So I do see why PowerToys is not aimed at targeting multiple platforms. Next comment, thank you for the presentation. I have a question. What advantage do you see from using Blazor Hybrid or simple PWA with just say like Vue.js or with a .NET backend? Some advantage I see is that your app can work entirely offline, no need to be connected to the internet. You can do also something specifically with the operating system. Maybe there are some features that you can interact maybe more with the operating system, while the web browser potentially blocks you a little bit more. I know with web browser you can use the camera and the microphone, and you can do some notification, which we can also do with mobile app, but with a traditional native app. But maybe there is more here that I'm not mentioning and that I'm not aware of that you can do with a traditional smartphone app using Blazor rather than just PWA.
Okay, that's all we have. Thank you very much for your time, and we love your presentation. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you everyone for coming, and see you next
time.
Thanks
everyone for joining us. See you next time with a new topic. Thanks all for joining us today.
Bye.